this one feather in Mariah's pillow that chose to play hide-and-seek with her, poking her all over the face for nights on end. And finally, it made a mistake. It poked her when she was awake and spelled its doom. She plucked it out and slurped it up. Mariah flipped the page in her Atlas of Nature and noticed some dark moldy spots glaring at her from the next spread. They weren't big yet, but they'd grow, she knew that much already. With a sigh, she skipped a few sections and found her favorite, the rainy forest. She reached down to the bowl of water standing under her bed and picked up a handful. She splashed it over the pages and lay her head down beside the book. The trees glistened with real water, the sky grew even darker. Mariah could nearly hear the sound of the rain. Not taking her eyes off the atlas, she raised her wet hand up and blew on it, first lightly, then with all the power of her lungs. It was one of her favorite feelings, and she could never stop wondering how it would feel if her entire body was wet by rain and caressed by a real wind. A little while passed, and then the doorbell rang. Mariah got off the bed, flipped the hourglass, and headed for the hallway. She stopped by the wall covered with numerous drawings of monsters and gave each of them a moment to refresh in her memory. Maybe one of them would like to come to her dreams tonight. They often did. The doorbell rang again. Mariah hurried out of the room and walked up to the bars. "Good evening," she greeted Jode, the woman who was probably her mother. "Good evening." They were about 20 open books away from each other and separated by 2 sets of iron bars. Jode grabbed one of the 2 handles and raised the set of bars close to her, high enough to put a box on the conveyor. "Are you feeling well?" she asked. The other handle let her set the rail in motion and shipped the box over to Mariah. "Is anything bothering you?" "I had a splinter again, but I took it out," Mariah answered as she watched the box ride towards her. When it arrived, she knelt down and took off the lid. "Can I get a new atlas?" "Another one?" "It's moldy." The woman sighed, but said, "I'll bring you one later this week." Mariah slid the box lid through the bars and placed all the food from the box on it. "Thank you." Jode didn't stay much longer. She lingered only for a few more sand grains. Mariah had always been the one who couldn't move away quickly enough for any warmth to remain in the meal. It didn't matter though. The food was awesome, warm or cold. Ma, u, e, a, lai. Mariah tried to vocalize each letter as she wrote them down underneath the image of a mouse in one of her coloring books. She had seen the word before in a different one and was pretty sure she wrote it right this time. No hints. She quickly checked it with the reference and yes, she got it. She was really getting good at this. Excited, she grabbed a blank piece of paper and began to practice some more. She'd color the mouse page tomorrow. There was no rush. When the sound of the sand shifting in the hourglass died down for the 3rd time this evening, it was time to go to sleep. Mariah washed herself somewhat. It was kind of hard to use the sink, but her bathtub had broken last week, and then wrapped a black scarf around the glowing topaz lamp. Too bad she couldn't see in the dark and would die of boredom without the light. Otherwise, she'd never unveil the shining gem at all. Nothing bad had ever happened in the darkness. Aside of monsterless dreams, of course. Mariah sat on her knees by the bars. In a moment of desperation, she had thrown the glowing topaz far into the hallway, hoping that it would show her something, anything. But no matter how hard she pushed against the iron, or from which angle, she could not see beyond the bend. The hours were passing by, and still nobody was coming. Mariah held her breath and tried to listen to the absolute silence in hopes of hearing footsteps, no matter how distant. Yet again, there were none. It could be that this was the wrong time. She had no way of knowing. The hourglass was useless now. It showed an hour, but an hour of what? A day? A night? Without Jode or Henry ringing the bell, Mariah had lost the track of time. The hunger was so awful. She had only been hungry once before, when she'd accidentally spilled her breakfast all over the floor and had to wait all day for dinner. But this time it had not been one day. It had been 4 or 5, maybe even more. She went back to the room again. Without the light, she found her way by groping around and reached the sink. She drank some water and then went back to the lit hallway. She could probably see enough in the distant glow to look at the books, but she didn't want to now. She just wanted someone to come. Why was nobody coming? Eventually, she cried herself to sleep again. She was awoken by noises. Someone was here. Mireia grabbed onto the bars and climbed up on her feet. Was one of her parents coming? They were further back in the hallway, but they were coming to her. Right? Please, she whispered. Her legs were shaking. They felt oddly weak, but she didn't want to sit down. They were coming. She heard voices, and in a moment, she also heard words. "It's the best way," someone said. It was a voice Mireia did not recognize. A new person? We should have done it a long time ago, before she knew what was happening to her. Henry, Mireia's probably father, countered. We didn't know if it would work, and may I remind you, we still don't. It's too much risk, Henry. Sooner or later someone may find her and free her. She's not exactly guarded, is she? Then maybe she should be. And who will pay for that? The new person asked. Starvation is not a killing. There is no killer. It could be about the intent, Henry said. That's why we haven't done it earlier. Mireia didn't understand what they were saying. Or at least she didn't want to. She yelled, "I'm here! Can someone come to me? I'm so hungry!" She heard us. Her mother was here as well. Henry, what do we do? Just leave and try not to think about it, the other man said. It won't take that long. She's a child. I'm still here. Please, somebody come. Please. Mireia woke up out of breath. She crawled out of her bed and lay flat on her back, gasping for air. It was just a nightmare again. Everything was fine. Calm down. You're okay. The room was still filled with the pleasant smell of the roast she'd eaten for dinner. She groped for the box lid, found it, and brought it to her face to sniff the traces of oil and spices. She began to lick it, slowly as she could make herself, to make sure it lasted longer. After a moment, the dream dispersed and Mireia got back up on her feet, took off the black scarf from the lamp, and found a fresh piece of paper. She sat down, grabbed an ink pen, and began to draw. She needed a new monster. This one would have rows upon rows of teeth and spider-like legs coming from between them. Many eyes, melting flesh, and a ribcage with torn skin wrapped around it. When Mireia was done, she took it to the wall and added it to the monster's display. It was a creature born to create nightmares, and hopefully it would do just that. Mireia much preferred to dream about nightmares that had never actually happened to her. She hadn't had the courage to go back to sleep that night, but she must have given in to the fatigue at some point. When the morning bell rang, Mireia found herself staring with her head resting on arms folded on the half-colored print of an animal ensemble. There were some critters in this picture she didn't recognize yet. She took the book with her to the corridor to ask whomever brought her food what they were. Henry put on his glasses to see the drawing better. It's a giraffe, he told Mireia. It's yellow with brown spots. Mireia put a pen and the book on the conveyor. Henry brought it over to him and wrote the animal's name beside the picture. He flipped through the book and captioned some other things for her, then sent the book back together with the food box. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. We will come later today to fix your bathtub and replace your desk. Don't get scared. The desk had been giving her splinters for a while. Henry said it was the humidity in Miriah's room that didn't agree with it. Miriah could not focus on anything. No one had ever come inside her room before, not since she could remember. It was an incredibly exciting prospect. It would be the first time she ever got to see another person up close. How would another human feel to the touch, she wondered. She definitely had to check. She moved the stool to the center of the room and placed the lamp on top of it. Now the light should fall everywhere so nobody would trip over anything. And then, once again, there was nothing to do but wait. The bell rang again some 3 hours later. Miriah jumped off the bed and hurried to the hallway. Would they raise the bars? Stupid question. Of course they would. They had to. How else would they come in? There were more people on the other side than ever before. Not only Jode and Henry, but also 2 other men. Miriah grabbed the bars on her side. "Hi," she said. And suddenly a thought dawned in her head. "You're going to move my bars, right? Can I hold on to them? Will they pull me up?" That sounded so fun. "Hello," Jode greeted her. Henry just nodded. They'd seen each other in the morning, after all, and greetings only happened once a day. One of the strangers stepped up to the bars on their side and took something out of his belt. "What's that?" Miriah asked. Even when it was in full view, she did not recognize the device. Suddenly, something flew out of it and hit her in the arm. It hurt. She shrieked and jumped back. There was something sticking out of her skin. She pulled it out, but something was wrong. She was feeling wrong. "It's okay, don't be afraid," Jode said. "Hold the wall and sit down, you'll be fine." Miriah looked to the people on the other side, but they didn't react. They did nothing. They didn't raise the bars, they didn't come to help her. The man kept that horrid shooting thing still in view, and nobody seemed to care. That was when she understood. He'd done this on purpose. She had to run. She stepped back, and then another stinging thing flew out and hit her in the stomach. "Stop it, please!" She wanted to run, but she couldn't. Her legs stopped working. "Miriah, calm down," Henry shouted. "It will just put you to sleep. Lay down, or you may hit your head and get a bump." It was strange to hear her name. They so rarely said it. The walls were closing in. The ground got closer, too, somehow. "Another?" a man asked. "No, it will do, she's going down." Miriah didn't notice when she lay on the ground, but she was on it now. Everything else was sideways. The man put away the horrible device. "No more pain?" "Okay." Miriah reached for the metal bar. It seemed to be raising, but she realized that her arm did not move at all. Sleep. She awoke suddenly, in a fit of choking, her mouth filled with an awful acidic taste. Her chin was wet, a bubbling foam was dripping from her mouth. A sharp pain shot through her as something hard dug into her throat, making the choking even worse. She screamed. She could not breathe. She was still in the hallway. Her neck was surrounded by a metal collar, her arms and legs bound. She spat out what she could, thrashing and turning her head, trying to get out of the bonds. The bars were up. "She's awake." It was Henry. He ran out of Miriah's room, but she couldn't see him. She couldn't turn her head. "She's choking." She tried to jerk towards him, beg for help, but her throat was clenching up, not letting any words through. The other 3 followed her father into the hallway. They were warm. Miriah could feel their warmth emanating from their bodies. "Don't want tub, please," she managed to ask. "Let it end. Let it end. Don't want any of it. Never wanted any of it. Don't want fixing." The words were too much. The foam got into her throat, her lungs, and Miriah began to choke again. "What do I do?" The man who shot the stings at her screamed, panicked. "She'll choke to death! It will get on me!" A shadow moved at the end of the hall. What are you doing?" a strange woman asked as she entered the hallway. She was young, much younger than Henry or Jode. For a second, she met Miriah's eyes, and her lips parted slightly. "Oh God, Hayne!" Jode shouted suddenly and rushed towards the woman. "Henry, how did she find us?" I asked, "What are you doing?" The woman swatted Jode away and pushed through. Henry jumped forth and grabbed her. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing?" The woman tried to struggle in his grasp, but he was stronger than her. Jode covered her lips with her palm and said, "Get her out of here." Henry dragged the young woman out of the hallway. Jode leaned on the wall. The two men ran towards her and they began to talk in hushed voices. Miriah couldn't hear anything. Then one of the men turned towards her and sent another stinger out of the shooting device. By that moment, Miriah did not have any strength left to cry. When she woke up again, the chains and the collar were gone. She lay on the hallway floor by the lowered iron bars. Everything was half lit by the lamplight coming from the room. Miriah turned around. Beside her sat a box of food. Why? Sometimes she asked that question to Jode. Sometimes she asked Henry. Sometimes she tried to ask herself or a monster in her nightmares. No one ever told her anything. She was hungry, so she picked up the box and carried it to her room. The lamp still stood in the middle. At least she wouldn't trip. Everything hurt. Her wrists and ankles were sore, her neck burned. Breathing scratched her lungs. She looked at the food, but she couldn't make herself eat. She walked to the bathroom, took off her clothes and threw them into the bathtub. As the faucet turned, the water began to flow. The tap was fixed. Why? Miriah moved the clothes to one side of the tub and climbed inside herself. Everything stunk. When the bell rang a few hours later, she didn't go. She stood with her back to the wall, hidden from Jode and Henry. They came together this time, and when she didn't answer the bell, they began calling her name. Alas, her shadow cast by the lamp betrayed her. "We didn't know you would react this way to the tranquilizer," Jode said when Miriah refused to show for a long time. "You shouldn't have woken up. You shouldn't have choked." "It must have been an allergic reaction," Henry added. "Why did you use it?" asked Miriah. "Because we had to." "Why?" "It's always been this way." "Why?" "We are sorry." "Why?" "Miriah." "Why? Why? Why?" She stepped out of her hiding and faced the couple. She wanted to wail on them with her fists, cry in their faces, scream until they finally told her why it had always been this way. But the two iron barriers kept them safe from her rage. "Come on, pick up the food. Nobody will shoot you again, we promise." Jode pleaded with her, but Miriah stood her ground far back in the hallway. "You have to trust us again." "Why?" Miriah asked through grit teeth, doing what she could to hold back the tears. "Because otherwise we will not give you food," said Henry. Miriah's eyes locked onto his, but Henry, without his glasses, could not see that. "I remember, she said as she took a step forward, that she wanted to starve me. You didn't in the end. You won't." They didn't answer. They thought she'd forgotten, didn't they? They thought it didn't come to her dreams all the time. Or maybe they thought she had not understood. She was just a child. You can't kill me. You're afraid something will happen if you do. Miriah grasped the metal bars and squeezed them so hard her knuckles went white. Something will get on you. Silence. Isn't that so? Silence. She didn't ask what. She didn't ask why. They wouldn't answer. They didn't care. She crouched down and picked the food through the bars. I don't trust you, she said, but I want you to go away faster. So here I am, taking the food. This time Miriah did not linger to watch the empty hallway after her parents left. She walked away first.